Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson, especially contained in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 132, I Bring an Unaccustomed Wine. Now, I find this a fascinating poem. Here we'll have Emily maybe pictured as a nurse, but I think there's something else going on here. I think we're really back to another poem about Emily's poetry, and Emily as a poet being accepted or rejected. And I think this is a very personal poem in some ways, and I'll try and walk you guys through it to see if you buy my interpretation of this poem. And again, that's why we call them Chats with Emily. It's always going to be speculative. Our assumptions are that you've been enjoying these Chats with Emily at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, again, our playlist is there. I'm hopeful that you've already been exposed to our introductory set of comments. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through the preceding 131 poems we just finished with, besides the Autumn Poets Sing. Now, the word picture here is fascinating because you have Emily trying to help someone dying of fever. And we obviously go back to our study of Whitman and Talks with Walden, especially the drum tap poems, when Whitman as nurse played that game. So I think it's easy to imagine that word picture of Emily trying to help someone who cannot help themselves, they're dying of fever and they need a drink and the like. Notice the goal here in this poem is to try and help another. And we'll obviously try and figure out exactly what she's referencing in this help she's bringing. I bring an unaccustomed wine to lips long parching next to mine and summon them to drink, crackling with fever. They essay, I turn my brimming eyes away and come next hour to look. The hands still hug the tardy glass. The lips I would have cooled, alas, and so superfluous, cold. I would as soon attempt to warm the bosoms where the frost has lain ages beneath the mold. Some other thirsty there may be, to whom this would have pointed me, had it remained to speak. And so I always bear the cup, if haply mine may be the drop some pilgrim thirst to slack, if happily any say to me, unto the little, unto me, when I at last awake. Now, it's interesting to read these poems in the order in which Johnson provides them, because if we said that poem 130 was that prayer request, grant me, O Lord, a sunny mind, the windy will to bear, what is it that she's asking to bear? Well, I think one of them is the opportunity to share her poetry, i.e. unaccustomed wine, with another, and not to be accepted for that offering. I think that stands a whole lot behind what's going on here. Now, you'll remember in poem 130 that we worked with immortal wine, and now here we are with unaccustomed wine. To lips long parching, and here we cannot help but read this and go back to poem 67. Notice how these poems start to stack on each other. Success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend a nectar requires sorest need. You know the real value of drink when you have not had it and you're dying of thirst. And here, of course, this is that next one. To lips long parching next to mine and summon them to drink. In other words, I've got somebody here dying of thirst and a fever, and I want to give them some kind of wine to drink, right? Now, obviously, Christ on the cross and being offered wine will also stand behind this kind of imagery, no question. Notice here, crackling with fever, they essay, only use of that word in all of her poetry. I turn my brimming eyes away and come next hour to look. So in other words, some kind of rejection. If you read this the way I read this, that is to say, I've tried to share my poetry and people have seen it as unaccustomed wine. She may be thinking, of course, of Bowles himself, right? The hands, she comes back to find the person dead now. The hands still hug the tardy glass. The lips I would have cooled, and then her use of the word alas, are so superfluous cold. I've mentioned T.S. Eliot in my previous lecture of East Cochrane. Well, I actually mentioned more of Eliot in this line. You'll remember in Hollow Men, we are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Alas, our dry voices. I think that Eliot, very influenced by his study of Emily. Notice here, alas, what is that word? Right. In other words, there almost seems to be a sense of, man, I wish I could help. I could have helped, but I couldn't. And so superfluous, cold. In other words, what I could have maybe done to help, it didn't matter. I would as soon attempt to warm the bosoms where the frost is lain, ages beneath the mold. In other words, I wish I could help some other thirsty there may be, to whom this would have pointed me, had it remained to speak. And of course we'll smile because we have called our collection of archived thoughts on Emily's poetry, Chats with Emily. I think that this is one of the reasons why I called the series Chats with Emily. I think Emily longs to share her unaccustomed wine. I think Emily longs to speak with you guys, and she wants us to engage in her poetry. I think that was her ultimate goal, of course, ironically, from a woman who never actually published any of her poems in her lifetime. And so, and this now is the ending, and it's almost like the poem 130 and 131 and 130 have to be read together. You'll remember the end of 131, grant me, O Lord, a sunny mind, thy windy will to bear. It's almost like a prayer here. And so, I always bear the cup. Notice the last word again of poem 131 is bear. Bear the cup. Of course, let this cup pass from me is what Christ asked for in Gethsemane. So all of a sudden it starts to, you can build this. If, and then twice happily. If happily, mine may be the drop. Mine what? I think it is the poem. Some pilgrim thirst to slack. Do you remember in poem 101 when she said it this way? Oh, some scholar, oh, some sailor, oh, some wise man from the skies, please to tell a little pilgrim where the place called morning lies. Of course, she's speaking of herself there. Here, some pilgrim thirst to slack. In some ways, guys, here I think borrowing heavily from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and the idea of pilgrims taking a journey that want to tell stories. I think she's talking to you. I think she's speaking directly to you as a pilgrim. Some pilgrims thirst to slack. This is the goal of why we are engaged in these chats with Emily. We have questions, yes? We have questions about, of course, Emily's poetry, no doubt, but we have questions about a whole bunch of other stuff as well. And Emily says, let me help you out. Maybe I can help you out here. If happily any say to me, notice again, Chats with Emily, we're back to conversations. Unto the little, unto me, notice in quotation marks, this is of course referencing the Matthew 25:45 passage that we referenced in earlier poems. You'll remember that Christ says, as you did it unto the least of these, you did it unto me, right? You helped to succor me, to help me. When I at last awake, in other words, at the moment of my death, and I awake to the other side, I hope that I am able to have done something that leads someone to help. Now, poem 919 comes to mind here, and we've quoted it several times. We're reading it over and over again as we get ready, obviously, to actually study it at some point. If I can stop, poem 919, some argue this is her best poem. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. I think the argument here at 2A is that all artists long on some level to help, to aid, to give some kind of succor, some kind of refreshment to the thirsty, to the parched lips. And at 2B, well, I love the extended metaphor, and I love that we call our conversations, our chats with Emily, that can derive so well from a set of lines like this. Okay, we say to Emily, fine, we will have that conversation with you. At 3A, I mentioned T.S. Eliot and East Coker. Of course, we've given full lectures on all of the poems of Four Quartets at learnstrong.net. I just want to read again what T.S. Eliot said was the heart of Four Quartets, East Coker 4. The wounded surgeon plies the steel that questions the distempered part. Beneath the bleeding hands we feel the sharp compassion of the healer's art, resolving the enigma of the fever chart. Our only health is disease if we obey the dying nurse, whose constant care is not to please, but to remind of our and Adam's curse, and that to be restored, our sickness must grow worse. The whole earth is our hospital, endowed by the ruined millionaire, wherein if we do well, we shall die of the absolute paternal care that will not leave us, but prevents us everywhere. The chill ascends from feet to knees, the fever sings in mental wires. If to be warmed, then I must freeze and quake in frigid purgatorial fires, of which the flame is roses and the smoke is briars. The dripping blood our only drink, the bloody flesh our only food, in spite of which we like to think that we are sound, substantial flesh and blood. Again, in spite of that, we call this Friday good. Now, I have no proof that Eliot wrote those precious lines after he had read poem 132 of the Johnson edition, poem 132 of Emily. But boy, oh boy, do they go together really well. And I'm not even going to go into it. I'll just let you guys deal with it. And of course, I've given full comments back on lunchstrong.net for East Coker 4. Finally, 3B. What was a time that you wished to help someone, but you couldn't? And to what degree are you enjoying engaging in these chats with Emily? I hope so. Thank you.